of American parents can't find licensed childcare. Businesses may even close because parents miss work to care for their kids. Wonder School can help solve that by making it easier for entrepreneurs to start in-home childcare businesses. Citi is investing in Wonder School to help offer more childcare options, which can help parents return to their jobs and help towns across America get back to work. For the love of moving businesses forward, for the love of progress. Citi.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PaleyFest Fall TV Previews. I'm Jessica Radloff, Senior West Coast Editor at Glamour, and I am so delighted to be your host for this very special conversation celebrating Apple TV Plus's highly anticipated new series, Lessons in Chemistry. And thanks to Citi, the festival's official card and official sponsor, for their help making this program possible. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome members of the series' creative team. Joining us are Lee Eisenberg, showrunner and executive producer. Take a bow, Lee.
Hard to do on Zoom, but I'll do my best.
Thank you. Next up, we have Sarah Adina Smith, executive producer and director. Next, we have Kat Smith, production designer. Courtney McBroom, who has the best title, I'm sorry, food consultant. I'm falling.
Thanks.
So nice to have you all here. I've gotten through the first 5 out of 8 episodes, and I'm so obsessed with this series. It is so beautifully done. Congratulations. Lee, I want to start with you because obviously Lessons in Chemistry is based on the New York Times bestselling novel by Bonnie Garmus called Lessons in Chemistry. It only came out about 1.5 years ago. So what was your first introduction to the book and what drew you to this?
My wife is a writer, and she read the book and said, you should call Apple and see what's happening with this book. And I had never done that before. I have a deal at Apple, so I have a relationship with them. It wasn't purely a cold call, but it was a semi-cold call. And I started reading the book, and I fell in love with Bonnie's writing and the characters and the story moves and the themes. And I just said, if there's any way I could be involved in the show, I would love to. And I spoke to Brie and pitched her my take on it. And we just hit the ground and just got into it. But yeah, I reached out.
You make this sound like the easiest show to get off the ground of any.
Seamless.
So simple. But I can't remember a time where a book has come out and then a TV series has followed it so quickly. So it's amazing, the turnaround time there.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing moved very quickly. But, I think with something like this, the book was such a great blueprint. And my wife and I have a young daughter who's 2. Sarah also has a young son. And so many of the themes were about parenting and motherhood and, finding your community and finding your village. And so many of the things that I was exploring in my own life and that I think resonated for so many of the creatives on this show. I think there was just a real level of investment. I've never worked with a creative team that felt like we were so in it together. And then I think everyone had such a personal connection to the material that everyone just kind of gave it their all.
How involved was Bonnie in the process, the author of the book?
When I signed on, Bonnie and I just started having phone conversations. I pitched her some things that I was deviating from the book and explained to her why I was doing that and why I felt when you're, as much as I love the book, it was impossible for several reasons as lazy as I am as a writer and as much as I would want to just kind of copy and paste, I did end up having to do some writing of my own. And so I walked her through the changes, and then we just had a really organic conversation. I would send her all the scripts and she would kind of come back with notes about character, notes about the science, which was incredibly important to her. And then in the edit, we started sharing all the episodes with her and then had another great conversation just about tone, about music, about 6:30. And I love Bonnie. We finally got to meet in person about a month or so after the show wrapped. And we had dinner, and she's as smart and charming and lovely as I would have hoped.
By the way, and for people that haven't read the book, 630 is the name of the dog.
Sorry.
Which is, no, it's fine. I haven't read the book either. And now I'm doing a deep dive into it because I'm so interested. Will fans who have read the book, like, do you think they're going to recognize, well, they obviously will recognize a lot of the, same monumental, themes and characters, but is there a lot that does feel different if you've already read the book?
I've shown the show to some people that have read the book, and I've shown it to people who haven't. And the response is the same. I think that people are connecting to the characters. I mean, Brie and Lewis Pullman, who plays Calvin, they explode off the screen. And I fell in love with both of those characters in the book. And I think they extend from that. And you connect with them. You connect with Elizabeth's daughter, like all 630, the dog. I just think that I think the casting was so incredible, and everybody elevated every moment that I wrote. And I don't think you need to be a fan of the book to appreciate the show. But I think if you have read the book, which is one of my favorite books of all time, I think there's an extra layer. And as someone who loves adaptations, you love to see what's changed and what stayed the same, and the catchphrases and all the lines that you remember from the book. I think we were very reverential of it. And I think we gave it its due.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say you definitely have. I haven't read the book, but
we did. Trust me, we did. No.
I love the series so far. Sarah, talk to me how you came on board. You direct the first 2 episodes, which Lee was just talking about the chemistry between Brie and Lewis, which is truly off the charts. Episode 2 is one of my favorites with them. So talk to me about how you came on board and what resonated with you about the series and the book.
Well, the project was brought to my attention by one of the other EPs on the project, Louise Shore. I've worked with her before, and it really spoke to me on a lot of levels. I think one of the biggest draws was just the chance to work with talent like Brie Larson and Lewis Pullman and Asia King. It's just really like people at the top of their game. And then thematically, I just felt I had a lot of personal connection to the material. I really wanted to do this book justice. For so many people, it's been meaningful because I think as far as we've come in our fight for equality on so many levels in the society, we still have a long ways to go. And I think Elizabeth Zott's story, the reason this book has resonated for people is that it's touching a lot of the issues people are still going through to this day. So it was meaningful on that level. And really one of the things Lee brought to it that I thought was so beautiful and poetic and really wanted to honor was this idea of a woman who's, because of the circumstances of her life, has had to be very sort of controlling about the way she moves through the world. And it's a story about somebody learning to embrace the unexpected and release that control, and getting to work with the actors, and particularly Brie, with that theme in mind, was a really deep and moving experience.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about the casting of this whole show, because as you mentioned, the cast is so fantastic. But Kat and Courtney, I want to bring you into this. I was so curious, because the series is based on a book, and because what you do is so everything is so creative, but especially with production design and being a food consultant, do you like to read a book ahead of time, or does it kind of interfere with the vision you have for a series?
Well, for me, I definitely read the book. I read the book before I got the job. I need to see that level of context, regardless of like how closely they end up following it. It tells you a lot about the character that you might not know, and a lot about the world in which it's set. And so it's essential to me whenever I do something that's based on other material, to like see what that other material is, at the very least.
That makes total sense. How about you, Courtney?
I definitely read the book. Once I realized I was going to work on the show, I was like, I obviously want to read the book first. But as far as the food went, like I already knew it was set in the 50s and 60s. So I'm obsessed with food from that era. So I have all of these vintage cookbooks. So I was like pouring through them again and like trying to like look at the food. And I was like, okay, this is like the food of the time. I know the food that Elizabeth makes in the book. And like, how do we make that be awesome on screen and also set Elizabeth up for even being better than the food of that time, which I think we did a really good job because she's kind of like ahead of her time with how she cooks a little bit. So
and Courtney's food is
the food is incredible,
also delicious. In addition to looking good on camera, it also tastes really good.
I was going to say, do you prefer food from the 50s and 60s versus food now
to eat? No. Well, I don't know. Like, I love a good casserole. Like, I feel like casseroles were invented in the 50s, but I'm just obsessed with like the way it looked and like the way they styled it and how they did all those like jellos, you know, like the weird jello salads with like vegetables in them and stuff like that. I just think it's a really weird, kitschy time to be alive and eating food, the 50s. But I would much rather eat food today than in the 50s, for sure. Like there was a lot of canned food going on back then. Like maybe
yes. I mean, part of it too is that it helps set her apart from the other cooks of that era, the very stylized way that the 50s looks in terms of food, because we like made a concerted effort to like not necessarily be that. There are certain things you can't get around historically, but if you really do a deep dive into 50s food, it can look very gross.
I think in part it's because too, like what predated the sexual revolution of the 60s was this moment in the 50s where women were tired of like thankless housework, and care work was not really given credit. Women's work wasn't being given credit. So you get the microwave, you get canned food, you get like shortcuts for how do you still take care of your family and be a full person and have a life. And I think what Elizabeth Zott is, why she's such an interesting character, she's saying like your work, caring for your family matters and should be counted as work. And here's a way to like feed your family nutritious, healthy food and still like, you know, be a full expression of yourself and have your full life too. I think she was like a symbol for how you can maybe achieve both without compromising one or the other.
Talk to me about the casting, because as you said, with the character of Elizabeth Zott, you know, she is very dry. She really operates from a place of intellect, and her brain is wired differently than a lot of other people. And that's where I think she excels as a scientist, because she is so academically focused. So how did you know Brie Larson? I mean, Brie could literally act out of a paper bag. She would be amazing. But how did you know she was the right woman to play Elizabeth Zott? And also Lewis, and then you have Kevin Sussman as Walter, Asia Naomi King. So many great talents in this. Talk to me about the casting process.
Brie really had to fight for the job. Nobody was convinced of Brie Larson, her Oscar win and mega stardom. It was just like, we weren't sure about it. No, Brie predated me on the project. I think she predated everyone in a very Elizabeth Zott-esque way. And she is the originator of the project. And I mean, Brie's incredible. She is beautiful. She's whip smart. She's hilarious. She's the hardest working actor that I've ever worked with. And she had utter commitment to the role. And a lot of those characteristics happen to fall a little bit the Venn diagram between Elizabeth Zott and Brie Larson. There's a fair amount of overlap, but she was the perfect partner for this. I mean, at every moment, she made the scripts better. She challenged us in the edit. I mean, she sat. You know, you have a lot of times actors have credits as executive producers on shows, and sometimes it feels a way of maybe just getting a little bit of extra money. And with Brie, she was in the preliminary meeting to the meeting and literally sat in the edit for weeks with me as we were locking the episode. So I am, as Sarah said, I mean, the opportunity to work with Brie, I mean, I pounced at it. I can't wait to work with her again. She's incredible.
I just also want to speak to just how brilliant her mind is. She would have pages of the most complex, scientifically in like a heavy dialogue that she would learn, not even in the makeup chair, almost sort of like on the first rehearsal on set, or even during the first shot. And it was incredible to watch her work. She has this ability, really actors who are just at the top level of their craft. They have this ability to fully commit and go there, but then also like turn it off and just be a joy to work with on set. And she was such a leader on set and did so much to help set the tone so that it could be a fun day of work for everyone. I will say, like, of all my projects, the cast and crew of this one were just, they made going to work every day a delight, truly. And I think it comes through in the show itself when you're watching just how much love everyone was putting into it, every decision, but also how much fun we were having.
And I think the show really has so many, it's really hard to almost kind of say I remember when my wife told me what the book was about, I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's for me. And then she was like, I'm telling you, read it. And she is smarter than me and knows these things. And then I devoured the book. And I think because the book, it constantly, and the show, you don't know what's kind of coming around the next bend. And there's so many different themes that you're touching on. And there's romance, and there's loss, and there's motherhood, and there's friendship, and there's excellence, and there's the patriarchy. There's all these things. And to have actors that are as smart and can play intelligent characters, where what's interesting about the relationship between Calvin and Elizabeth is they're obviously incredibly good-looking folks that would find each other in other circumstances, but really it's a love of science. And I'd never seen that before. And that's what was so exciting to me in the book. And hopefully what we were able to translate in the show is these two people fall in love with each other's intellect. And with all of the people on this Zoom and, the hundreds of other people that worked on the show, it's like, how do you do kind of like the meet cute and the romance beats, but it's really happening with like a chalkboard full of equations that I personally don't understand, or writing a paper late at night, and all of these things where it's like, you've seen people kind of at restaurants and having drinks, and the camera kind of floats out and it's raining and they're having a long conversation, and you don't hear what they're talking about. These are people that all they wanted to do was work together. And the two of them challenging each other in that environment was what kind of brings them out of their shells so that they can find other layers of each other.
Yeah, Elizabeth and Calvin are both weirdos, really, to put it bluntly. And it takes them working together to let their guard down and like take a chance on each other.
One thing we talked about a lot with the show, and Sarah was incredibly involved with the writing, was in the writer's room. We talked a lot about outside variables. And Elizabeth, when you first meet her, is incredibly closed off. And as a scientist, you don't want outside variables. You have a plan and you want to stick to it. And as you allow other things in, there's contaminants, things could go wrong. And she's trying to kind of she's protecting herself in a way. And when you allow yourself to open up to outside variables, like a romantic partner, like changing your job, like, friends or anyone else in your life, you will experience heartache, you will experience loss, and all of those things. You'll have anger, you'll have frustration, but with that, you also find love and companionship and connections. And I think what we try to accomplish with the show is you really see this world that she creates, and it's allowing those people in, for better or for worse, that draws the path of her life.
Right. Speaking of the world that she creates, Kat, this incredible production design that you have brought to life, Elizabeth's laboratory, the Supper at 6 set, it is so visually stunning. What were some of the biggest conversations that you had early on in terms of executing what we would see on screen?
As long as we're on the Brie Larson bandwagon, I will say that she came to one meeting where I showed her what we had in mind for these sets. And she was so involved in the project, and she knew so much about it. But there was one set that she was kind of like, I don't know if I like that, because personally I like this and we're not supposed to like it. And so that was the kitchen set on the TV show that she has. And basically it's described as sort of like a fantasy kitchen for women. And I had one idea of what that fantasy was, which apparently is not that bad. And so he really did make me think about what would really read immediately as like a man's version of what a woman's fantasy is, because that's the reality of what's happening. And so she was so, she gave me that germ of the idea for that pink kitchen, and I really thank her for that. But I also think that Brie brought like a real humanness to everything that that character could have become so mechanical, but she, just as a person, she's super nice, but also very human, and every sort of strange thing that she might do, which she does a few things that are offbeat, she brings like such a warmth and humanness to it. And I felt like everything, all the suggestions she made on like her apartment and so on, I feel like was influenced by that, for sure.
Yeah. By the way, there's a pool scene. I think, is it episode 2, Sarah?
Yeah.
Which I love so much. How hard was that to direct and figure out, also too, from a production design point of view of getting that with, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just such a great scene.
I mean, Kat, I remember we had some trouble finding a pool that would work with our schedule, but I loved the one that we found, and it was, I loved directing it. I actually like put on a swimsuit that day in front of the whole crew, which is, by the way, when you're standing next to Brie Larson, maybe not the right choice. Needed to like get in the water so I could just help move things along faster. But it was a joy. It was so, it was one of my favorite days of shooting, actually. And I remember there was one shot, everyone was like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. It's this transition shot when we go from the pool scene to then there's a thunderstorm before they're like running through the rain. And I was like, I think we were out of budget or time to be able to like get an actual, water tank and rain machine that day. But I was like, we're going to just take a hose. We're going to go underwater and shoot above and just like have a hose hit the surface and have like a lifeguard standing there. And everyone was so skeptical. And I just want to brag that it worked and it made the cut. I'm very proud.
That was one of the great things about working with Sarah, is that she had such visual ideas for the show. And anytime I get a director like that, I'm like, I grab onto it, because it's not all about like necessarily the close-up. Sometimes it's about adding the texture, and it's about like interesting shots, and the visual gives you such production value. That particular pool, it's very hard to get a period pool, because you'll always get, even in period pools, a bunch of extra stuff like fences and stuff that don't belong in the period. And so there was that. But this is an old building. It's like an old country club, I think, in Los Angeles. And then the other weird thing about pools back then is that they didn't surround them with like lounge chairs. If you came to a pool, you like brought your towel, and that was it. You just sat there on your towel.
You're getting a little glimpse of just how wonderfully Kat's mind works. She like was just an encyclopedia when it came to period, and all of her decisions are so research based. So it was like, even just on a day-to-day as a director, I could always go to Kat if I had a question of like what would be period appropriate, or what would feel right for that era.
Right, but sometimes I was wrong,
but like 99% of the time.
I don't remember you being wrong. So
yeah, same. I don't either.
I'm not going to admit it, but yeah, for sure. There were a couple of times where I was like, oh, that was bad. But
the one thing I will add is, I was so busy writing and kind of handling the producing elements of the show that I didn't spend as much time on set as I usually would. And so for me, I was watching the show kind of unspool in front of me in real time. And every night I would get sent links to the dailies. And I never watch dailies because I find dailies to be boring, and I just want to see the episode cut together, and then I'll really dig in. And my wife and I would watch the dailies when Sarah first started shooting, it was so beautiful. It was so gentle. The science kind of came alive in a way that I didn't fully understand as I was writing it, how a director was going to take it and make it work. And it was just, I literally every night we would spend a half hour going scene by scene. My wife also happens to be completely obsessed with Lewis Pullman and will probably leave me for him at some point. So I think maybe that probably played into it a little bit. But the show, the look that everyone on this Zoom created is just like, it's a character into itself. I mean, you know, sometimes people say that, but I mean, the production design, the food itself, I mean, it's such a feast for the eyes.
What a great choice of words.
Thank you.
So, I mean, you know, very, very well said. I was so curious too, Kat, by the way, the pink color in the kitchen. I kept thinking about how for the Barbie movie this year, they were talking about how there was a shortage of a certain color pink for this. How hard was it to get the color pink you were looking for to match what would have existed in that time period? Because it is such a stunning set piece.
Well, there's two things about that. One is they have color palettes online from paint companies from different eras. And we tried to stay within those paint colors, obviously. And pink was pretty big in the 50s. So there were various shades of pink. You have to be very careful not to pick one that's too bright or it'll be overwhelming. But there was no problem actually getting the paint because you can always mix in like white or black to make it a different shade, a shade closer to the one that you would want, which we did. I think the paint we had was 25% lighter than the paint company had. And then the other thing is you have to be a little bit mindful of what it's going to look like in black and white because that's what this set was meant for, even though we see it in color. And there's just a few moments we see it in black and white. But one of the things you see a lot in some television is when they present it in the black and white version, it's not as contrasty as it was in real life. So I was careful with that. And like originally, I had some great photos of I Love Lucy, and they used a lot of pink to do various tones in black and white television. So I had a color version of her set to look at.
That's amazing. Courtney, talk to me about how you came on board this series. Being a food consultant just sounds like the most amazing job in the world ever. I know you have an extensive resume. You worked so hard in this industry to get to where you are, but talk to us about how you got on the show and what your day-to-day was like.
Yeah. So Brie's a friend of mine, and she called me up, I think when she first started realizing she was going to make the show. And she was like, hey, I know you have that extensive collection of vintage cookbooks. Do you mind if I'm going to do the show. It's set in the 50s. She's a chef. Do you mind if I look at them? And I was like, sure, come over anytime. We'll go through the cookbooks. And then like months passed and she went off to, shoot some amazing film somewhere. She comes back. She's like, okay, we're going to start filming the show soon. And I actually think, I don't really want to borrow your cookbooks anymore. I kind of just want you to work on the show. Is that something you'd be into? And I was like, absolutely. I was, I've never done actually TV or movies before. I've only done like cookbooks and print and stuff like that. So I knew there was going to be a little bit of a learning curve, which there was. My first day on set, I was like, oh my God, what is going on? Thankfully, Sarah was there and she was so amazing. But I learned quickly.
I'm trying to remember, was lasagna the first thing we did together? What was the first food we did
or
together?
Actually, no, the very, very first thing was the cafeteria scene where it was like 10 different lunches.
That was so beautiful, Court. Oh my God, that was such a beautiful
first day ever doing it.
That was your first day.
I was trying to see what.
It's much harder on film and TV, I would think, than print in a way, because it's like the actors also have to be able to take bites of that food and eat that food, and it has to look, there's so many other variables going on at once, and we need like 7 of them. We need you to make like 7 copies.
You need
the perfect
like 12.
thing.
The amount of lasagna,
Yes, exactly.
I've probably made like 50 lasagnas at this point. Actually, more than that. 50 is a low ball number. I've made more lasagna than than anyone has ever made, I'm betting, in the entire world. That's might be slightly hyperbolic. But
we had it that Elizabeth Zott has made, what is it, 87. She's working she's trying to perfect her lasagna recipe. So I think Elizabeth Zott is at like 87 or 79. So you and Elizabeth are neck and neck in terms of
neck and neck. But and also like getting to make all the different components. So like for the lasagna scene, it's like you have to make the noodles separately 12 times, make a full lasagna 12 times, make a raw lasagna 12 times, make the mise en place for the lasagna 12 times in every different step of the way, because it's like, all right, she's adding the carrots, we're going to stir it and cook it. All right, we're cutting, we're going to go to a new scene, but now the carrots need to be cooked. So now we're adding cooked carrots to the pan, and it has to look like the pan had already been used. It's just like a lot of these like tiny variables that you don't really think about, because I'm like a restaurant chef. You don't ever think about that in restaurant world. But it was really cool. I love it.
Okay, this food consultant title is totally selling yourself short on the show. Like, there should be food consultant, just sounds like easy breezy, like come in.
Oh no, it was a lot. Also, I was a hand double. Anytime there's a close up of cooking, it's these babies on screen.
I was gonna say, I was gonna hold them up. The other thing too,
money makers. I cut myself I was so nervous. It was like my first time. Do you remember?
I forgot about that. I remember now.
First slice, and like time.
Like there goes the hand double.
Just went ahead and chopped my finger not off, but like nice solid slice on the old. Like they had to call a medic. Had to put like the glue on my hand. I was like, I'm cool, it's fine. Like, is this okay to talk about? Like, it wouldn't stop bleeding. Poor Sarah was like, we're not even gonna get the shot because Courtney can't stop bleeding. I was so
I know, obviously worried more about making the day and getting the shot than poor Courtney bleeding on the set.
Well, but it wasn't like it's one of those things. It was like a very superficial cut that just, like when you like nick your finger and it doesn't hurt at all, but there's just blood everywhere. It's great. Not my shining moment.
I think you're right though. Food consultant doesn't do the title. I would say like food warrior, food ninja. Like I can't tell you the amount.
Food ninja is probably kind of like that. Kind of encapsulates it a little bit more.
I like that.
Exactly. She's running onto set and she's got like a lasagna in one hand and all the ingredients in the other. And I'm saying like we have 3 minutes to get this, and like I need it right here, and like but this needs to look a little bit more wet. Spray it down, okay, and now be the hand double. So she was like one of our most important allies.
I would say food magician.
Yeah.
There's something magical about the way it looks.
There you go. All of your titles don't properly explain all the work that goes into what you do. They need like, different explanations, like log lines. You should have your own log line next to
That's a good note. Yeah.
Need to go back to the casting for 1 second. We have to talk about this dog, 630 in the show. I have never been more moved by an animal, I think, since Annie, probably. This dog, oh my God. How many dogs did you have to audition? And does this, just tell me everything about the dog.
Sarah, you're the Gus whisperer, so get in there.
Gus came to us from
Gus is 630, by the way.
Okay.
Gus is the dog's real name. Gus descended from another realm. Gus is a magical creature. I don't know if Gus is, part purely dog, might be part some other higher form of species, but truly, I think like having a dog like that on set was also one of the reasons that we had so much fun every day. It really helps set the tone. I think he had everyone on their best behavior, but also sort of like reminding us that, what we get to do for our job, it's the best job in the world. It's amazing. And I think it was almost a reminder to keep it playful and fun. And Gus comes with a professional trainer who's like one of the best in the business, who's, done this for so many films and TV shows. And so for me, it was, I will admit, a learning curve doing all these animal scenes. I've done a little bit, but not quite this much. my favorite stuff with Gus is and I should say, now that I'm really thinking about it, huge credit to Lewis and Brie, who understood that to get what we needed on camera had to form like a really tight relationship with Gus. So I think that my favorite stuff was when it was just like this natural relationship that they had formed, and it really felt like 630 was their dog.
You feel it, and that's what also is so emotional as you watch this show, because you truly believe in this. You believe in all the characters and their relationships and everything else, how it all forms, and it does. I was so moved by each episode. Also, Lee, how did you determine where to stop episodes? Because when the show rolls out, it'll be 2 episodes, I believe, at once, and then 1 a week. How did you determine what were the good stopping places in crafting the episodes? How challenging was that when adapting it from a book?
Very. And, so much of what we talked about, when you get into the writer's room, we had a template. The book had, the book was always kind of our North Star. And there were so many moments and story moves that are just plucked right out of there. But you want to leave people wanting more. You want, with the challenge of writing episodic television with a serialized story is the episode needs to feel complete, so that when you watch the episode, you feel like you kind of got what you were told you were going to get out of it. And then it also needs to entice you to come back for more. So with a show that isn't about the president's daughter is kidnapped and there's 24 hours before, they're going to find her, those shows kind of have an inherent, ticking clock and twists and turns. And so to have a show that's as soulful as Lessons in Chemistry, but has surprising character moves and story turns, and keeping the audience invested, both because I think you fall in love with these characters. I think you fall in love with the relationships. And so you want to see where they go. But, reaching the end of an episode and having the audience, as much as you can kind of have these cliffhangers or question marks, ending the episodes with a line where you're like, no, I need more. We talked about that all the time. And I think that marrying those two things and not making it feel, the show needs to feel, the show is period, but all of the themes are universal and timeless. And the pace of the storytelling, I really like a certain pace where scenes move, and I tend to not write 8-page scenes. And I think that the way that we shot the show and the way that we edited the show, it's both elegant, but it also feels like it moves. And so I found that people are kind of, the few people that have seen it so far are kind of devouring the show and not like, oh, I watched one and then, yeah, maybe I'll come around to another one. Like I think there's a real desire to kind of keep going.
And the way that episode 2 ends, like it's going to be a really long week until people the 3rd episode. But I'm glad you brought up, it was a great transition. Well done, Lee, because you talked about period pieces and timeless themes and all of that. So this question actually comes from our festival sponsor, City, which is, do you see the parallels between the sexism Elizabeth faced during the time period of the series and the cultural climate today? And anybody can weigh in on that.
Well, Lee, as the man, I think you should.
I was just waiting. I was waiting to interrupt the women, actually. So why don't you go, and then I'll mansplain.
To me and mansplain sexism would be great.
Yeah.
It's all of us who have the opportunities that we do today stand on the shoulders of everyone who came before us. And I think that we have made so much progress in so many ways, but there's a moment, at least it feels like to me, where there's almost a resentment or a backlash towards that progress, actually. And I think a lot of people are feeling that. And I suspect that's why this book has meant so much to so many people, is that these battles to simply be taken seriously and seen for your full humanity by others are still very real. And that goes not just in terms of sex, but obviously in terms of race, perhaps even more so, and gender and sexuality. And just, I think I find that we're at this exciting moment in human history where we're having these reckonings. I think they're really important. And the one thing I will say that I think makes this show really special is these themes are inherent in the show, but it's actually not what the show's about. I think if the show had only been about that, it would almost have felt like a punishing watch or a boring watch. This show is about like humanity in all its complexity. And it's a reminder of a kind of faith that perhaps we have lost. It's interesting coming from a atheist scientist, who doesn't believe in any type of God, but finds a really hard-fought modern faith in her relationships with others and in community. So I think it has a really universal message that's going to bring hope to a lot of people.
Yeah. I think for me, the one thing that I really love about this show is like, in terms of like feminism and things like that, is like this, it really shows the subtleties of misogyny that women have to deal with all the time. It is very much in your face often, but not always. And that feels so true today now. Like it's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts, it's like one small microaggression maybe not seem like a big deal, but like over and over and over again, when it over the span of like a lifetime, it really adds up to a lot. And that's one of the reasons why I really love this show so much and was so happy to be involved in it, is because I feel like it shows those microaggressions really well. And again, like the subtleties of it, which I think is much needed, and it needs to be shown more in media. I think it did a really good job. Good job writing it.
I would say that if anything, it makes it more relevant, the fact that there are these problems that we have today. Because the 50s can seem to people like a long, long time ago, where it was the bad old days, which it was. And this show has a lot of those moments that might not happen today. But if you're coming from a time where you still see it and you still are recognize that it happens, then that'll just make it that much more poignant for the audience.
I think also, I'm not speaking as a man. I will speak for one of the male characters in the show. You come from a place of privilege and you take for granted what you have and how the world is kind of laid out for you. And I think one of the things we explore in the show, as Sarah said, is you see people that aren't afforded the same opportunities. And there's a moment in I think in episode 1 where Elizabeth says Calvin is so logical and practical and doesn't really think about, because he's a white man, doesn't think about things like gender or race. And he thinks about talent and he thinks about ability. And he says to her, why would anyone judge you based on, something as non-determinative as gender? And Elizabeth says, how many female scientists can you name? And he says, Madame Curie. And then this brilliant scientist, that's the end of the list. And I think that, I can't remember if that was in the book or something that we wrote, but it's those moments where you kind of want the audience to be like, yeah, you name it. How many can you name? And you just kind of, you get stopped and you realize in those moments that, oh, right, things are, whether you think that, that the world that you create and the people that you surround yourself with are fostering, inclusivity and inequality, those little moments like that just remind you that, at the snap of a finger that the scales are still not set properly.
Right. I can't remember what I was reading the other day. It might have been one of the pieces in the New York Times about the book, but it was saying it's not anti-men, it's anti-sexism. And that's what it is,
What makes it so refreshing is that Brie's character, Elizabeth Zott, because of the way her mind works, it's so funny actually when it happens, because she has such a logical brain, and because she is so focused on sort of the truth in her work and in her scientific pursuits of what matters most. So when these moments do come up, it's sort of I think what makes it an enjoyable watch and not like some sort of lecture on sexism is it actually ends up being a lot of comedy.
I think I 100% agree with that. And the other thing I was going to say is the book is definitely not anti-men, and the show, we went out of our way not to make men the heroes at all, but I think there's inherent decency to the characters, and I think both with the men and the women in the show, those characters, they all have moments to shine, and it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the best of everyone. And I think that was something that just kind of came through as kind of the extrapolation from the book organically in the room was, decency, and that, you know, if we come together, we can learn from one another, we can prop each other up, we can support one another, and that it's impossible to go through the world and navigate everything that comes at you alone. And that was something that I think is something the character learns, and I think is one of the reasons I think the show feels tender.
I think so much of that comes from Lee as a writer. I think we can't. I don't want to understate that, how much his sensitivity and insistence on seeing the full complexity and humanity in each of these characters, I think made the show what it is. It's definitely in the book, but I feel like Lee took it to a whole nother level, and then Brie and the other actors also humanized all of these characters so much that I think that's what will make the show really universal, and I think men will like it too.
Men will like the show. Yeah. You've heard it here first from a man.
They really will. And, you know, it's been so hard for me during this panel because I really didn't want to bring up The Big Bang Theory since I wrote the oral history on it, but I couldn't help see the parallels. One of the reasons why viewers loved Big Bang so much is because they saw characters on screen that did come from a place of intellect, but were different. They had difficulties in the norms of what society, you know, says you have to be like. And you see it in the character of Elizabeth Zott, of how she does sometimes struggle with the societal norms that are around her because she functions from a different place. And it's so heartwarming to see in this series how, you know, other characters relate to her and embrace her for even the moments where it's obvious that she is very different. And that's what's so heartwarming, like Sarah was saying about what you've done, Lee, is that every character is so well developed and so tender, whether it's Asia Naomi King's character, I'm forgetting her character name at the moment, and her husband on the show, his character, Walter's character, so many of these people, you see how they relate to someone that might be different from them. And that's what I feel like is the soul of this show, is relating to that and making it more acceptable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought of the Big Bang Theory analogy, but I think it's right. And what's fun about the characters on Big Bang Theory, and what's fun, I think, about Elizabeth and Calvin, is they don't adapt so that they can fit into what people expect of them or what society deems as normal. As Sarah said at the beginning, they're weirdos. They're lovable, rootable weirdos, and maybe that's not right for everyone, but they find their people, and they find each other, and that's all that really matters. I don't think that the lesson from Big Bang Theory is not, oh, people think that science is dorky, so you shouldn't be a scientist, and you should love football because most people love football. That's not where those characters live. And I think the same thing with Elizabeth and Calvin. The show's a love letter. I think there's such a beautiful romance here, but I mean, it's a love letter to science and to discovery and to, it's what we all do. I mean, all of us, we create every day. And maybe the format for it is slightly different, but we're all building and trying new things and failing and then learning from those failures so that the next one is stronger. And that kind of process is that was the only way I could speak to science. And then the way that the science is communicated on screen is because we had science consultants and because Google is incredible. And I would look up something and then just crib it and then put it into the show.
Yes. It's about community. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
For people.
100%.
Well, you know, there's also a huge connection between science and art. And my husband's a physicist. And so I feel that like sort of every day that the same tools that we use, scientists use, which is why I think, you know, I have a little bit of an affinity with laboratories and science-based shows, maybe.
I love it. Like I said, the laboratory scenes, I find it so gorgeous. It's so like all the beakers and everything else. Like it's really fun to see that in a series. Before we go, is there anything else you would all like to add about just, I know you loved working on the show, but anything in particular or what you want viewers to take away from it when they finish the 8 episodes?
I mean, I have a food related something to say.
Tell us.
Well, so the show is about chemistry, but it's also about the chemistry of food, but it's also about the chemistry between people and the bonds that are made. And I think food is almost like its own character in the show because it like facilitates all of these things. Like if Elizabeth hadn't made like a chicken pot pie, she wouldn't have ended up doing the show. Like I don't want to do any spoilers, but like you'll see like food like traveling through the show almost as its own character, kind of like leading Elizabeth along on her arc towards realizing how important community is. And you can also see that in the way that she cooks throughout the show. Like you haven't seen like the last episode and I won't say anything, but like keep that in mind when you watch it. It's like really interesting and beautiful.
You should probably also, as an audience member, have some food nearby when you're watching it.
Yes.
That's a great note, Kat. I think this is a show that really sneaks up on you. That my hope is people are really going to let themselves get lost in this world. And I think the performances in particular are so compelling that I think, as Lee said before, that once you start watching this show, it sneaks up on you and it gets its emotional hooks in pretty deep and ends up being about so much more than you might first have realized. So I think there are so many things people will take away from the show. Probably each person will take away something different, but I think there's a real resonance in Elizabeth's journey in realizing that a life well lived and a rich life is a life full of relationships with other people, and that those relationships come with risk. And she comes to realize that that risk is worth it.
So beautifully said. Anything you wanted to add?
I think everyone said it better than me. So as the writer, I will cede the answers to the group. That's everything they said was exactly right.
Well, you all deserve a round of applause because it's a beautiful show. I can't wait to watch the other episodes. I'm trying to like sparse them out because I don't want it to end, but congratulations. And with that, thank you for joining us for this very special PaleyFest Fall TV preview conversation with Apple TV Plus's Lessons in Chemistry. And thanks again once also to City for their support. You can enjoy more of these programs by clicking the subscribe button below. And thank you and take care.